The ego is not your enemy. It's not something to kill or transcend. It's a useful tool, a necessary function. The problem isn't the ego, the problem is identifying with the ego, believing the ego is who you are. The ego is the sense of being a separate individual. The I thought, the narrator of your life, the voice that says, I am this and I want that. It's a mental construct, a story, a collection of thoughts about who you think you are. Look closely at this I. Where is it? Can you find it? When you search for the one who is searching, what do you find? Thoughts about yourself, memories, beliefs, but no actual entity. The ego is a ghost, a phantom, an illusion we've all agreed to believe in. But this illusion is powerful. It creates suffering, because the ego is inherently insecure. It's always comparing, always judging, always defending, always trying to prove its existence through achievement, through acquisition, through being right, through being special. The ego creates separation. Me versus you. My group versus your group. My beliefs versus your beliefs. All conflict comes from this sense of separation. All violence, all hatred, all fear. The ego maintains itself through division, through opposition, through otherness. When the ego dissolves, so does separation. You realize you're not separate from anything. You're the whole expressing as this particular form. This doesn't mean you lose boundaries. You can still say no, still have preferences, but you're not defending an illusory separate self. Ego dissolution doesn't happen once and for all. It's a process, a practice. The ego returns. The identification happens again. You notice, you recognize, you return to awareness. This cycle continues, but over time, the identification weakens. The periods of presence lengthen. Suffering alerts you to ego identification. Whenever you suffer, the ego is active. Not pain. Pain is physical, but suffering, mental anguish. This comes from the ego's resistance to what is, from wanting reality to be different than it is, from the ego's demands not being met. The ego thrives on problems. It needs them. Without problems, the ego has nothing to do, no purpose, so it creates problems, invents drama, makes mountains out of molehills. This keeps the ego alive, gives it a sense of importance. Spiritual seeking can become ego activity, the ego wanting to become enlightened, to achieve liberation, to be someone who has dissolved the ego. This is the ego's most subtle trap, using spirituality to strengthen itself, to become a better ego, a spiritual ego. True dissolution happens when you stop seeking, when you recognize that what you seek is what you already are. You're not trying to get rid of the ego, you're seeing through it, recognizing it as the illusion it is. The ego fears death, because ego death means its dissolution, the ending of the separate self. This terrifies the mind, but what actually dies? A collection of thoughts, a story, nothing real. The awareness you are remains, unchanged, eternal. When you stop identifying as the ego, freedom emerges. Not freedom to do whatever you want, but freedom from the tyranny of self-concern, from the constant inner dialogue, from the endless comparing and judging, from the burden of being someone. Love dissolves the ego, real love. Not the ego's version of love, which is neediness and possession, but selfless love, where boundaries disappear, where you're not loving someone to get something. You're loving because love is your nature. When the ego dissolves, you don't become less loving, you become more loving, because love is what remains when the ego isn't blocking it. Service also dissolves the ego, when you're genuinely helping without thought of return, without building identity as helper, just responding naturally to what's needed. The ego can't survive this, because it has no gain, no story to tell. Meditation weakens ego identification. In meditation, you practice being awareness instead of being the thoughts, being the witness instead of the character. Over time, this recognition stabilizes. You still think, still function, but you're not imprisoned by thought. The ego wants enlightenment. Awareness doesn't need it. The ego wants to become. Awareness already is. The ego wants to get somewhere. Awareness is already here. This recognition is the dissolution, not of the ego as a function, but of identification with it. You don't need to fight the ego. Fighting the ego strengthens it, creates a fighter and something to fight. Just see it, recognize it, smile at it. The ego is a child playing dress-up, taking itself very seriously. You can let it play without believing the costume is real. Ego dissolution is not the end of individuality. It's the end of suffering about individuality. You still have preferences, personality, quirks, but you're not defending them, not taking them personally, not believing they define you. What remains when the ego dissolves? Awareness, presence, being, love, peace, the qualities that were always there, but covered by the ego's constant noise. The ego is a cloud. Dissolving the ego reveals the sun that was always shining.